Hello, my name is Dick Feeney. Welcome to my show. Today we're going to do a little armchair tour. As you know, I've done tours for the Chippewa Valley Museum for a number of years, and today you're going to have the enjoyment of taking one of my tours without riding on the bus. And I think we'll get right into the program then. Thank you. Today we're going to take the downriver tour. And here we are with the door open on the bus, and you're ready to climb aboard. Now the first thing we do, we pass out a few maps with just a little bit of a souvenir to take home with you. Here's our happy campers ready to go on the tour. We have a 45 passenger bus here and it's full. Well, we usually start out, we head down through Shawtown, and in the old days we used to cross this old iron bridge, but in its later years the bridge wasn't strong enough to hold us anymore, so we had to make a little detour through the sand and gravel. But this is basically old Highway 37. Used to come down Menominee Street and Ferry Street and down across the Short Street Bridge. Of course, this bridge has been replaced now, so any tours from now on will be on the new bridge. But now we're going back a little bit further. This is the old original wooden bridge, and this bridge was rumored to be one of the longest in either the country or in the state. It was 275-foot wooden span, which was quite an unusual thing for its time. Well, you're going to go down along the south shore of the Chippewa. We come along to this place. It's called Hadley's Ferry, and this is at the very far end of Ferry Street, and that's how Ferry Street got its name. And this is located right across from where I-94 crosses now. Well, we're going on down the road on Highway 37, and we come to the junction of County Trunk B. And there is where the old original Red School was. Now the new Red School is up around the corner a little bit, about a half mile away or so, but this is where the original Red School was, and that's how that area got its name. A little bit further on from the junction of B is the old Silver Springs. Now Silver Springs has been there for many, many years, and the old raftsmen, when they'd come back from floating their rafts down the river, they'd come back and they'd always stop at the spring. Of course, it was also a stop for stagecoaches and any other travelers, and it was known far and wide for its pure water. And that's where the Silver Spring Gardens got its name, for the Silver Spring horseradish that's grown right adjacent to this. A little further on down, we came to the old junction of Highway 37 and 85, and there are a few houses up on the hill here, and this was known as Smithville. Well, now 37 and 85 have bypassed this area, but the little group of houses is still there. We're going to continue on down along the south side of the Chippewa River on 85, and we're going to take a short detour over to the river. And this is the old Caryville Ferry. This operated from in the 1860s until the 1960s. And it was a kind of a rickety old thing, but it was quite unique. Originally, it was powered by the current, and by turning the ferry, winding up the cable on one side or the other, they could turn the ferry in the water, and the pressure of the current on the ferry that's sitting diagonal of the stream would drive it across the river. Well, later on, that became a little bit too slow, and it was motorized. They had an old Model A engine on it that would run it back and forth, and went a little faster then. And they could take up to 3 small cars on it, or 2 large cars, or 1 truck. And in the early 1960s, they replaced the ferry with this nice bridge. But you can still see along the side here, this is the old ferry house, it's still there. This is the ferry keeper's house. And this was actually the landing of the ferry, is now the boat ramp that's right underneath the bridge. This is in the town of Caryville. It was named for John Cary, was a member of the land company. They had a store and a mill and a pickle factory. This is kind of a neat old barn that's in the town. It's got a rather strange overshot door on it for loading hay into it. We go on down the line a little bit further and we hit the Huftel Hill cutoff. And this is just a nice scenic little spot that you can cut across to County Trunk O going toward Merredene. But our normal tour doesn't go this way. We go on through Rock Falls. This is Rock Creek in the little canyon. All the way from Rock Falls down to Huftel Hill Road is in a narrow canyon like this. If you want to go up the track, you have to pretty much walk up the stream. Now this is the old Rock Falls Mill. When I first started tours 30 years ago, the Rock Falls Mill was here. And there it is in all its glory. This is the chute that goes down to the turbine, which sits down in this area. And you can see the rods coming up here. The drive shaft comes up here. There was a bevel gear in this little house that went in here and drove all the belts and pulleys that were required to run the mill and the elevator part of it. But in 1969, the mill burnt down. As the fate of many old mills, the dust that was in the mills would ignite from spontaneous combustion, or just a tiny little spark would be enough to set it off. And now we see it today. The foundation is still there. You can see the shafts from the turbine coming up here, but it's been closed off, and there's a picnic table on top of the foundation. There's another view of the foundation of the mill. The pipe going up here that you see is a pipe that comes from the water, and this is used for the township fire department to fill their water trucks. And this is just a view of the mill pond. And right across the road from the old mill is a set of the old mill wheels laid in the stone in the bank. They replaced the mill wheels many years ago, and they put these in the bank across the road. Now we go on down a little bit further and we come to what they call Happy Island, or Merredene Island. The main channel of the river is off to your right here, and this is called the Merredene Cutoff. And this area on the right of the river here is the Happy Island. It's about 3 square miles. The original town of Merredene used to be on this island, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when we come back up the river on the other side. But looking down here, we see this is the new town of Merredene is down here. And this actually was the old main channel where the island came back together again. In the late 30s, they decided it was too hard to keep bridges to this thing. This channel kept getting wider and wider, and it kept washing out the bridges. So they decided that it would be better to buy out all the farms on the island rather than repair the bridge. And so they bought this out as county land. And the last person to leave was in 1944. You can see there's still the remains of an old silo and a barn and the house foundations here where there was a farm. And this is the remains of one of the bridges that went to the island. Now this is looking the other way. This is the Merredene cutoff here. The town of Merredene is right down to your right here. And over here is the other side of the island. The river comes around here, and this was the old main channel, came around this sandbank here. And it used to come right down through here. When I was young, this was the full main channel of the Chippewa River going right through here. Well, somewhere in the late 50s or so, it started to cut a little channel through over here. And that one kept getting wider and wider and wider until now all of the channel goes through over here. And this old main channel, there was the main channel, is now grown up to trees already. Now this is an example of how the river changes, and sometimes it changes quite abruptly. And it'll stay that way for 100 years, and then all of a sudden there'll be a big change, and everything is different. This is the old ferry house for the Meridine Ferry. This one operated from 1860 to 1965, over 105 years. And here we see an old Chevrolet going across down the ferry. This one is a little more primitive. It didn't have a house on it, and they raised and lowered the gates more by hand than they did with the other one that had cables and everything to do it with. This one was abandoned when they built the bridge too, because once they had the bridge, they figured it was easier to drive around than to wait for the ferry. This is the old main street of Meridine. It was quite a place in its heyday. And this is the way it looks now. It's pretty quiet. And there's the old Meridine School, built in 1926. Well, just beyond where the Meridine Ferry crossed, there's a slough goes through there, and they called it Reeves Canal. It was partially opened up to supply logs to the Tyrone Logging Company. And this is part of the old canal. It's also combined with Cranberry Creek. And we used to have some old narrow bridges that went across it here with sharp corners in it. As you can see, this is a pretty sharp one, and the bridge is pretty narrow. And to get through this with the bus was quite a problem. And they had to drive way out here on the grass with the front wheels to try and get lined up to go through between here. And as you can see, he's having a tight squeeze of it there. He's just about scraping the paint on the side and on the front corner on the other side. And here he's on the bridge. You see there isn't much room to spare even when he's going straight through it. But this bridge has been replaced now, so you can whistle right through there at a pretty good clip. This canal, we always called it the Alligator Slough, and there's always some of these things that kind of give you the hint of alligators. It's a little far north for alligators, but they sure look like them anyway. This is the second bridge over the canal. This is down by the Fairplay Farm. It crosses the canal again. And it used to be a very pretty place there with trees overhanging the water. Almost kind of spooky. But both of those bridges have been replaced now. A little further on, we crossed the old Milwaukee Railroad tracks. And of course, that's now been replaced with a nice paved bike trail, the Chippewa Bike Trail. And by golly, there's another alligator. Then we come out along Tyrone Lake. Now this was a lake that was formed in here to hold the logs for the Tyrone Mill, which is just on down beyond here. Now the town of Tyrone was platted in 1856 by Hamilton Hubbard. He had a mill, a ferry, a store, a school, and a boarding house, and a dance hall. All of those are gone except the old boarding house, which stood here until 1993. It was occupied by a couple of old fellows called Stan and Joe Sider, who ran interference with the NSP nuclear plant that was supposed to be developed in the area. They decided that they were still the village, and that you could not do away with the village unless you had the okay of the occupants. And they elected each other mayor and secretary and went to court. And it put a big delay on the NSP nuclear plant, which was to be built nearby. This sort of got the national attention on the news, and a whole bunch of the no-nuke group came around, and they had big rallies and protests and sit-ins and delayed the whole thing. And about that time, the 3 Mile Island coughed up, the big nuclear plant out east, and that put sort of the end of the whole thing. And they ended up winning out. So it does sometimes, small people can have a big effect on what happens in the world. Unfortunately, the old building burned in 1993 and it's no longer visible. This is some of the other buildings that were around. This was the old barn. And along next to it was an old thrashing machine. And this is a wooden frame thrashing machine. And all the wood is rotted away, and all that was left was the metal gears and components to it. So the whole thing is just sort of collapsed in a pile of iron. Now we go on down a little bit further and we come to the old Milwaukee Road Bridge. This was the Red Cedar branch that went to Menominee, splits off on the old Milwaukee Road. This very unique old bridge with the square ends to it. And it's practically one span going across the whole channel of the Chippewa River. This is the end view out. This is now, of course, the junction between the Chippewa Bike Trail and the Red Cedar Bike Trail. They both are very nice trails. It's a very interesting ride. I think it's 37 miles long. You can ride on a bicycle all the way from downtown Eau Claire to Broadway Street Bridge in Menominee. This is before they put the railings on. This was just shortly after the rails were pelted up. But now there's full side rails on it so that it's safe for riding a bicycle. A little bit further on down is 9 Mile Island. And this is a place that it's 9 miles from no place in particular. It's hard to tell what it was 9 miles from because some of the places that were big on the river in the original days are no longer of interest. One thing that they did have on the 9 Mile Island was a passenger pigeon roost. Now these passenger pigeons were a communal type of bird, and they lived in flocks of thousands. And they would darken the sun when they'd come over in a big rolling cloud. The birds would fly over the cloud and land in front, and the others would fly up and go over, and it was like a big rolling cloud, and they would just devastate fields as they went through the countryside. People thought that they could never get rid of them. There were so many of them. They broke the big elm trees down on the island from their weight where they nested. They shot them, they netted them, they did everything they could to get rid of these things. They shipped them in barrels salted to New York City for squab. But surprisingly, all of a sudden they realized that they were all gone. The last one died in captivity in 1914, and there are no more passenger pigeons. They're now extinct. Now, these models were mounted by J.C. Clark, and they're on display around the area at the beginning of Phillips Science Hall down at the college. A little bit further on down, we're just straight east of Durand on Bear Creek. This is the old Dorwin Mill. Well, Beavis Dorwin came to Wisconsin in 1856 on an ox cart, and he found this place where the rock formation was just right to build a dam and a mill. And he built the first mill here in 1856. Well, then they discovered the first year that around the back of this, there's a big rock wall that goes all the way around here, and it comes right back to over here. And in the spring runoff, the flood would go over the side and come around here, and it was eating out at the bottom side of the mill. So they had to do something about this. Just a little narrow rock rib, and they decided to cut a hole through there to let the overflow go through. And this is a hand-hewn tunnel that now looks like a natural bridge. And about half of Bear Creek now goes through the tunnel. And this is the old turbine from the bottom of it. There were two turbines in there. One of them was just recently recovered out of there, and the other one they took out many years ago, and it's probably still in operation up at the Tilden Mill north of Chippewa Falls. Well, in about 1992 or 3, a tornado came through here and took the top off the building, and that sort of put the end to it. I believe it's now completely collapsed. This is the old mill keeper's house. It's quite a unique old house, has the widow's walk up on the top, and that's probably just as old as the mill was, but apparently they kept that up in a little better shape. Now this is the map of Pepin County. This is 9 Mile Island. We talked about the passenger pigeons. Right in here where it says mill, this is where the Dorwin Mill is, right east of Durand on the crossroad. Highway 10 comes through here now. Here is the town of Durand. Across the river is Arkansas, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And on down below here is Round Hill, down the river, and up the river is Wabeek. And we'll talk about each of those places just a little bit ahead here. Well, here we're stopping in Durand for our noon break. Everybody likes to get out and have a little stretch. They can either go to the cafes downtown or head over to Hardee's like these people are doing. Just down around the corner is the old depot. This is the old Milwaukee Road that came through in about 1880, came up along the Chippewa River from the Mississippi. And this is the old depot there. You see that's quite an old train. Well, here that same depot is still there today. It's been quite nicely restored. And here they even have an old Railway Express cart out front. The next stop is the old Courthouse Museum. And after dinner, people join up here and get on the bus again. But before that, we go through a little tour through the museum. And this is the front view of it. This is the old original courthouse. A couple of brothers, Ed and Lon Maxwell, or Williams, they sometimes went by the name of Williams, were acquainted with the James brothers and the Youngers and Quantrell after the Civil War, and both were caught stealing horses and sent to prison at Joliet, Illinois. Lon, the better of the two, got out first and moved to Hershey, Wisconsin, to work in the mill and pinery, and he was going to go straight. He met and married Fanny Hussey of Arkansas, which was the Arkansas, Wisconsin, just across the river from Durand. But he cut off his toe accidentally in a woods accident and couldn't work. Well, then one night he heard a whistle in the night, and Ed had come back, and he led Lon astray again, and they went out to the woods and practiced with their pistols. And then they started going on business trips to different places, and they'd always come back with lots of money. Well, come to find out they were robbing banks. Finally they took off for Illinois on a trip, and Fanny was upset and went to live with their parents in Arkansas, Wisconsin. Well, the sheriff from Illinois, where they'd robbed a bank, sent out postcards to Durand warning that their possible return to the area. Under Sheriff Miletus Knight visited Fanny at her home in Arkansas, or at her folks' home, and hoping to catch Ed or Lon there. Well, she found out about this, and she was quite upset. She had a miscarriage with her child, and she died shortly after. But when Ed and Lon returned, Lon was in grief over this and vowed revenge, blaming the sheriff for her death. He crossed the river on July 10, 1881, looking for trouble. They were heavily armed and met deputies Milton and Charles Coleman on the top here. It was about near the junction where 10 and 85 come together now on the north side of town. Well, Milton said, "You are my," and he was going to say prisoner, but before he could, he was shot in the neck by Lon. Ed shot Charles in the chest. Lon was hit by a shotgun blast in the hand. But Lon put another bullet in Charles' head and fired twice more into the body. The posse was called out, but they escaped across the river. Well, this is the old courthouse. Well, Ed and Lon eluded the posse for quite some time around here, but eventually, all points bulletins were sent out, or in those days they sent postcards. They were eventually spotted posing as goose hunters in Grand Island, Nebraska. There they stayed at a farmer's house, and he thought it was strange that they had Winchester rifles and pistols to shoot geese. And he notified the local sheriff, who posed as a hunter and decided they were the missing Williams or Maxwells. Well, Lon went to the barn to look at the horses, and the sheriff captured Ed. But he hollered and warned Lon, who escaped. And Ed was brought back to this courthouse and to this jail. The building on the right was the jail. And this is what the jail looks like, and it's still there. You can visit it as part of the courthouse tour. And this is Sue Glenn's from the museum is trying it out here. I don't think I like this very well. Well, then we go over to the courthouse. This is one of the nice ladies that takes us through the courthouse. She's dressed in the period costume. And we'll go on up and to the courtroom on the second floor. This is where Ed was brought hearing before the thing to decide if there had been a crime or whatever. This is the judge's bench here. This is the way things were for many years, and nothing has been changed. You can still see it just as it was. Well, he pleaded not guilty by self-defense, but his explanation of how the shooting went, people became so enraged that from somewhere produced a noose and put it over his head, and they pulled him down this stairway and outside, and they threw a rope up over the limb of the tree, and he was swinging in the wind. This was all in 1881. And a strange thing happened to Lon, too. Even though he escaped here, he got in trouble out in Montana. And he was captured, and he was being taken to the state prison at Deer Lodge in a stagecoach. And he had his hands manacled, but in the dark, he escaped out of the stagecoach and ran off, and they couldn't find him in the dark. But many years later, they found a skeleton in that area with his hands manacled, and they figured that was probably Lon. So they both ended up in the same predicament with their hands manacled behind them. And the next picture is the Prindle Inn. This had 13 gables and 13 towers on it. This was used as a place to watch for steamboats, and it was also the hotel. It later was called the Jordan Inn. Just about every governor up till about 1960 stayed in this hotel. On down the street was the bridge across the Chippewa River. The original bridge was called the Leonard Bridge. It was about a block south of the present bridge, and it was a rotating drawbridge. And here you can see the bridge is open, and they're pushing a lumber raft through it. The boat behind it is the Phil Shekel, belonged to the Knapp Stout Company. So this would be a raft of lumber coming down the Red Cedar from Menominee. On the front you see these big long arms here. Well, there's a man on each one of those. There's a big sweep oars, and they use those to steer the front of the raft. The boat just pushed with the point on the front of its hull, and they had to row the front of the raft around to keep it going in the stream when they came to a bend in the river. And this is an aerial view of Durand in the modern times. As we go across the bridge and you look downstream, you can see this peculiar mountain here. It's called Round Hill. This is another view of Round Hill. This was the site of an old monastery at one time. And before that, the village of Onaway was located right at the foot of it. And here we see an aerial view of it. This was a place where the Weyerhaeuser Lumber Company had a shear boom. And what this was a gate that went right across here. This is the entrance to what they called the Beef Slough, and this runs down alongside of the main channel of the Chippewa. They had this gate that they could close off and divert the logs into Beef Slough, or they could open it up to let the steamboats go through. It had a rudder on the end of it, and by using the power of the current, they could control the location of the shear boom. Well, down below here is the Beef Slough, and at one time it was pretty much of a straight channel that went through there, and they used to run their logs in there. It was a good place to store the logs because they weren't so apt to get swept away by a flood. But this is a tremendous big area called the Tippany Bottoms, and the Beef Slough runs all down through here, and eventually it doesn't come out until actually down in the Mississippi below the mouth of the Chippewa. And this is just a vast area of sometimes they've called it the Everglades of the North, and many islands and sloughs, and it's too wet to wade in and too thick to swim in. So it's a very, very difficult place to get around in. An airboat works pretty good to get down in here. And a fellow that had one of those said he once found an old boat, an old river boat, just the hull of it. They had trees growing out of the top of it, but he could never seem to get back and find just where it was again. Well, let me go on a little bit further down. This is a little bit further than we usually do on our bus tour, but this is the site of the birthplace of Laura Ingalls Wilder. And she, of course, started the Little House books of the Little House in the Big Woods. So this is a replica of the house that they lived in near Pepin. That was the first story of the series, of the Little House in the Big Woods. And later on, they went to the stories of Little House on the Prairie, and where they moved to South Dakota. This is a picture of Carrie, Mary, and Laura about the time of the little town on the prairie. Mary was her older sister, and she was the one that was blind. And this is Ma and Pa Ingalls. Pa doesn't look much like Michael Landon, does he? This is Laura about the time she got married to Almanzo Wilder. And this is her age when she was about 65. This is about the time that she started writing the Little House books. And there's quite a series of them. I think there's about 6 or 8 volumes of the Little House series. A little bit further on down is the town of Pepin. And here we have the anchor to the Phil Shekel. That's the boat that was going through the Leonard Bridge. This was the old steamboat that operated on the Chippewa River. And here you can see right in the corner on the left side of the picture, there is the anchor on the deck of the Phil Shekel. And this is the way it's displayed now in a little park in the edge of Pepin. They also have a little depot there and a lot of information about Laura Ingalls Wilder. And this is the waterfront in Pepin in the old days. This is quite a few years ago. Some of these buildings aren't there anymore, and some have been renovated. Now we're going back up closer to our route is Eau Gallie. This is the dam at Eau Gallie. Now there's another story series that sometimes get mixed up with Laura Ingalls Wilder is Caddy Woodlawn, and that's an entirely different children's book. But we'll get to more about Caddy Woodlawn. Anyway, her father worked at the Eau Gallie Mill when they lived in Dunville. Now we're back to the Wabeek Mound. Well, the Maxwell brothers, when they were hiding out from the posse, they sat up on this mound with their field glasses and watched where the posse was going, and thereby they were able to elude them. And that the town of Wabeek was built around the mountain, and the Wabeek Mill was built on the outlet to the 9 Mile Slough. Before the Civil War, this was the one of the largest mills in the area. It was run by C.C. Washburn, who became a general in the Union Army and later became governor of Wisconsin. And I wouldn't be surprised that Washburn County was named after him. Now we're looking at an old map of Dunville area. This is the 1848 original survey maps that were done when they laid out all the section corners. And there wasn't much there. There wasn't even much of a town. There's a place called Colburn's, is where Dunville was, is right here. And here's Colburn's Field up here. That's probably the only place there was any opening. Now the highway comes right through here, and Highway 25 comes down through here. Right about in here someplace is where Caddy Woodlawn actually lived. But here we're going to talk about the town of Dunville. This is the old bridge. This has been replaced. And across here you can see an old silo. This was part of the old livery stable in the town of Dunville. Here's a view of Dunville in the old days. This is the store, and upstairs was the dance hall. This is a 33-room nap house hotel. And this was the livery stable over here, I believe. In the river here you can see some lumber rafts. They floated the lumber rafts down from Menominee because that's quite fast water, and it was pretty tough to get steamboats up there. There was too much rock in the bottom. But they float the rafts down to Dunville here, and then they would connect them into a bigger raft and push them down with the Phil Shekel from there to Reed's Landing. Also, Dunville was the first county seat of Dunn County. And the courthouse used to be up on top of the hill until it burned, and then they decided that they would move the county seat to Menominee. Now this is the foundation of the old store and dance hall. You can still see it right beside the highway today. Next to it here, I believe it was some sort of a grain elevator. And across the road was the old hotel, and you can still see where the basement was to that. Here's a picture of the Phil Shekel. That's, again, the same boat that they used to push the lumber rafts with. Up on top of the hill, right above the town, there are 14 old Indian mounds, Indian burial mounds. And those date to way back about the year 1000. And of course, somebody has opened them all up and looked for anything of any value at them. But the mounds are still there, and it's rather of interest to be able to see some real genuine Indian mounds in this area. Well, in the 1880s, the railroad came through, and on the way to Menominee, it sort of eliminated the problem of floating the lumber down the river. They loaded it on the railroad. It was much simpler. And this now, of course, has been abandoned again. It is now the Red Cedar Bike Trail. And as we go up along the bike trail a ways, we come to the Dunville Quarry. It was a very high grade of sandstone. This is the old lifting boom. Here is the bottom of it. There's the remains of the old ratchet and everything that they used to lift the blocks of sandstone out to put them on a train. They actually had a siding there where they could load stone to carry it away with. Here you can see how the boom worked. It had this boom on the side that went off from this gin pole in the center. They're lifting a big block of sandstone onto a flat car. Here's another view of it. Here's the gin pole sticking out here in the block. And this is the Red Cedar River over here, and this is the main track, and this is the spur that came in just special for the quarry. And stone from this quarry was used to build this beautiful Tainter house in Menominee. And the Tainter Theater, and the Episcopal Cathedral in New York City. This is one of the old buildings of the Dunville Quarry, and that since has collapsed, so it looks about like this today. Now we'll talk some more about Ketty Woodlawn. Her original name was actually Caroline Woodhouse, and they lived in a little farmhouse and from about 1860 to 1867. This is her at about 3 years old. She was involved in 1862 when the Indian scare passed all through the Wisconsin and Minnesota. A lot of the people were joined together and go run all the Indians out that lived down in the Chippewa Bottoms at that time. And she was a friend of one of the Indians, so she went and warned the Indians that they were getting this big posse who were going to come and run them out. She brought this, I believe it was Indian Joe, she brought back to the farm, and he wanted to find out what's this all about. We're not fighting or anything, and was able to avert the whole thing. There was nothing to it. It was all set off by the New Ulm thing many, many miles away, but people got in sort of a panic, and due to her heroic actions, the whole thing was averted. And this is what the story of Ketty Woodlawn is about. As she was older, her granddaughter, Carol Ryrie Brink, wrote down all the stories that she told about in the old days in Wisconsin, and that became the book. It was a Newbery Medal winner. This is her picture in later life. Well, this was Ketty's old house, and back in the 40s it looked about like this, and the first time I saw it, it looked like this, was in pretty tough shape. And people decided that this was actually a historic landmark and they should restore it. And so they moved it over closer to Highway 25, and they built this nice rail fence, and they put the windows back in and a new roof on it. And this is the way you can see it today, and you can actually go and see where Ketty Woodlawn actually lived. Beautiful little bay window with this little seat that sits in there that is a very, very inviting place to sit and sew. This is the house as it looks now. Well, this is another one of the things in the second book about Ketty Woodlawn was Magical Melons. And in that she tells about going up on the bluff and by a big rock chimney and finding a rattlesnake. Well, this is the rock chimney. You can just barely see it through the trees. But there's quite a remarkable chimney, and it looks like a very good place for rattlesnakes. Now we're going to look, this is the map of Dunn County. This is an 1878 map. Here we have Dunville. This is 9 Mile Island. This is Pepin County. We looked at 9 Mile Island in Pepin County. It divides the two. Here is the Red Cedar River going up to Menominee. This is the Chippewa River going over here. We're going to go on up here to Downsville. And then we're going to come back here to a little place called Louisville. Then across over here, and here's a place called Rumsey's Landing that's right on this bend here. Then we're going to go up to Falls City. Then we're going to go down here and to the north side of the Happy Island. This is Happy Island right here, the original Happy Island. And over on this corner was the original town of Meridean. And when they put the railroad through in 1880, they decided to move the town over to about here is where Meridean is now. So they moved it from the island over to here. But they kept the ferry over here. They kept the ferry and the bridges. And this was the channel that cut off, what they call the Meridean cutoff. And when this was the main channel when I was a kid. This was the way the river went. But in the 50s, it started to cut through this point right here, and it cut right across here. And this is the part that's now dry. Between here and here is now dry, and you can walk from this part to this part, but you're still on the island. You still have the current that goes on either side of you. And then on into Eau Claire. Well, this is the old round schoolhouse in Downsville. It isn't actually round, it's sort of an octagonal, I guess. It's now used as a storage building. And this is an old bridge on Highway 25 that was built in 1905. That's, of course, since been replaced by the one that's there now. Quite a narrow bridge. And right below the bridge was the Knapp Stout Mill in Downsville. And over here we see this little building with a strange window and a door in the corner of it. That was the paymaster's building, the paymaster's office. And up here on the hill you can see a bunkhouse. There was an old shed here, but behind here you see a bunkhouse with rows of windows on it. Well, there's nothing left of the old mill at all, but the old bunkhouses are still here. And one of them is a house, and this one is a tavern. That's right in downtown Downsville. And this building, which was the paymaster's building with the window and the door on the corner, is still in existence. It was moved here when they built Highway 25. And then when they put the bike trail through here, they moved it again, and it now sits near the Empire and Pine Museum. But that building is still intact today. And here is the old Knapp Stout store. This was the original store. It was operated by the Knapp Stout Lumber Company. You can see it says right on the front of it, Knapp Stout Company. And it's a novelty place and crafts and sort of things. On the side of this building is an old mural showing a picture of what life was like in the old days. This is a picture of the building on the side of the building. Here's the sign on the front that says Knapp Stout Store. And then down the street a little bit is the old Oddfellows Hall. This is also built out of the Dunville sandstone. And this is now the Empire and Pine Museum. And they have a very, very interesting display on all the things about the Knapp Stout Company. The old saw rigs. There's an old pot-bellied stove. There's a model of a blacksmith shop. They have household furniture from the day and saw material. This is an old electric outboard motor that was invented in Menominee. These are samples of the types of saws used in the mills, the circle and the vertical frame saw. This could be set up as a gang saw with many parallel blades all cutting at once. This is one of the river boats or bateaux that were used on the log drives. And outside they have a hand car, a little bit of short line railroad there and a hand car like they used on the railroad. That's Flip Fye and Ralph Kaiser trying it out there. They were a couple of passengers on my bus. In fact, Flip was the driver, I believe, since he was the bus company. A little bit further up the line is the old creamery, and this now is a very, very nice restaurant and bed and breakfast operation. Then we go on down the road, we come to the town of Louisville, and there's only two things left from the town of Louisville. Is the Louisville School, which was built in 1923, I believe it says, and the Louisville Post Office. Oh, this was sat on a farm for many years. There you can see the door is open, and you can see all the little cubby holes in where people could get their letters. This is an old original picture of it when it was at Louisville. It's now been moved over behind the Empire and Pine Museum, but there it is, the same building. And here you can see all the little cubby holes. They were fastened with little leather hinges. These were where people came to pick their mail up. Well, this Louisville was originally called Massey Settlement because that's a lot of the people that moved there were of one family. And this is where the smoke came from that got all the people in Dunville worried that the Indians were attacking. And what it was that they were making soap, and they spilled the stuff in the fire and made all this big smoke, and got everybody excited, thought that the Indians were burning and pillaging. As we go on along the north side of the Chippewa River, here's a nice view that we have of the Chippewa River looking over. The area down to the right is called the Dunville Bottoms. It's still a very wild area. And here we had a little picnic on top of the bluff. This is right above the area where the channel of the river has changed. Okay, this is looking on downstream from that area. Here you can see this is the channel of the river. Now it cuts off to the side here. And here you can see the old channel that went down through. It used to be the main channel, and it's all dry and grown up with trees. We go on around the bank a little bit further and park above where Rumsey's Landing is. Here it's quite a steep hill down here. We sometimes get a little closer with the bus, so we stopped and got out and walked to look where Rumsey's Landing was. And this is where Rumsey's Landing was, just at the base of this hill. And there's a little backset that runs back up in here. And that's where it was the home office for the steamboat company. And there were 2 steamboats burned to the water line here in the 1860s. There was Chippewa and the Johnny Schmoker. And they caught fire and burned both of the steamboats and some of the buildings. But here you can see this is the same end of the hill here. Here's some of the buildings. There used to be, you could find where the depressions were, where the basements were, but I'm not sure if you can anymore. It's pretty thick country in there, thorny bushes and whatnot. This is another picture, Rumsey's Landing. You can see the high bank. This is where we come with our bus right up to the top of the hill and look down this steep bank. At this time, it was an open sandbank that was still sliding into the river. They've since put some piling and whatnot in there to protect that so it doesn't wash out anymore. Here we see some of the old marked logs laying on the bank here. And this is the Ida Campbell. This is the same boat that's on the picture that many of you have seen of the boat tied up by Water Street and 4th Avenue. Well, this is the same boat. On those other pictures, it's a double-deck boat, though. So I don't know if just what had happened, but this one is also the Ida Campbell. So they may have either added that extra story onto it later, or something happened to it and they took it off. This is that backset that was at one time quite a large area where they had this protected area that they could park their steamboats. And this is a loading area for grain. And they had a big chute that came from the top of the hill and went all the way down to the river. And they would bring the wagon loads. There'd be many, when the boats were loading, there'd be many wagon loads waiting up at the top of the hill. And they dump right from their wagons into this chute. They'll go right down and load onto the steamboat. A little bit further up is Falls City. And just below the bridge on the old road that goes through Falls City is this old dam. It was just below what used to be Highway C, but C has bypassed Falls City now. This belonged to H.T. Rumsey, who also had the steamboat line. And here you can see the old part of the old dam, and the mill was up to the right of it here. Here's another view. Here you can see where the mill, actually there was a much bigger mill here at one time. Here you can see the chute that comes down that ran the old turbine that ran the mill. My granddad one time took a load of grist to be ground at this mill when he was just a boy and came to work for a summer for his uncle who lived in the Elk Mound area. But now we're going to go a little bit further upstream. Here's the end of another hill, and this is Happy Island over here to the right yet. And this where this camper is, this is where the old ferry to the north side of the island went. And right over on this point over here is where the old town of Meridine used to be. Now when I was a kid, there was still the old cable still went across the river, and the old ferry keeper's house was still there, but the ferry boat was gone. Up on top of the hill is the old Meridine Cemetery, and this is quite a unique place. All very old graves in this area. This one is Rachel Finch. She died November 29th, 1864. This is during the Civil War. She was 84 years old. Well, that means she was born in 1780, just after the Revolutionary War. Here's another one, is Mehitabel, the wife of John Barnes, died in 1877. The strange names of the people in the old days. Marcia Grace Harrington died March 1887, aged 5 years and 23 days, our darling. Then from there we go on down the hill, what they call the Fosbrook Hill. This is a very narrow road. It's just barely wide enough for the bus to get through between the trees. Once in a while they scrape through the windows. And if you don't have leaves coming in the windows, you haven't been on a Dick Feeney tour. This is on down the hill. It's quite an interesting road down there. People are quite surprised to see a bus coming down. This is the old ferry landing. This is where the ferry went across. That's Happy Island across the way, and over here is where the old ferry house used to be, and the town of Old Meridine. Strangely, on that map, they spelled Meridine M-E-R-D-I-A-N, like meridian. We could going on a little bit further on toward town. This is Porter's Mills, or Porterville. This is from across the river looking down on the town. There were two big mills in the town here. There was also shingle mills and planing mills in the town of Porterville. There were about 1,500 people lived there. And Gilbert Porter was the man that started this town and the mill. And here's what they call a Sanborn map of the area. Here's the two mills, and here's all the other different buildings. Northwestern Lumber Company was the owner of it at the time this map was made. And about all that's left of it now is some of the piling. This shows up when the water is real low. This looks like it was probably a walkway or like a dam or something that went across out to the island. There's many of these old sets of pilings up the middle of the river. And in fact, they get so thick that they're actually become an island. And that's what the island that's there at Porterville. Normally you can see just the island, you don't see the piling. But when the water is low, you can see that the whole island is lined with piling. And that's what actually formed it. And other than that, the main part of Porterville, this would be the same view as the other one, has all been excavated into a big pond for the sand and gravel that's in its area. And here's an aerial view of it. This is the bike trail coming down here. And right on this corner now, there's a little plaque with a picture of the town of Porterville and a little bench where you can sit along the river here. But you can see the whole main part of where the town was has all been obliterated. When I was younger, you could still see some of the depressions of basements in there too. But that's all been eliminated now. Another thing is down in that same area, we go down to on the Silver Mine Drive, and how Silver Mine got its name was this old silver mine. Well, there was a gal who claimed to be a clairvoyant, and that she had a dream, and she was told in this dream by this Chief Bigheart about this big silver lode that was supposed to be in the side of the hill there. People got all excited about it, and they spent lots of money, and they dug a 1,700-foot shaft into the side of the hill here. They'd salted this. They'd load up some pieces of silver in a shotgun and blast it into the rock, and people, oh boy, there's real silver in here. And people invested lots of money and about $60,000 worth, and all of a sudden this gal left town with all the money, and I never heard of her again. But this is the actual hole, is right in the side of the cliff there, right along Silver Mine Drive. So that's where Silver Mine got its name. Now then we come back out on Crescent Avenue. This is Crescent Avenue that comes up from Shawtown. And here we see a tower. This is the first WEAU tower. It was built out on Crescent Avenue in 1937. And you can see part of the AM radio system is these cables that are laid in the ground. You can see where they're radiating out from the tower. And that's part of the system that's needed along with an AM radio tower. Well, that's been long gone, and the WAU's towers were moved out to Seymour and later out by the television station. And what do you suppose is there right now? Right where the bend in Crescent Avenue is where I-94 goes through now. This is looking back toward town, the Chippewa River and the college high-rises here. And here we come back along Ferry Street by the old Shawtown Bridge. There's the old gas station that used to be along the side of it there. It was already abandoned at that time. But I think that building is gone now. And then we get back to the museum. Everybody's had a good time. We'll continue on next time. We'll have some more history or travel. So tune in again. Thank you.